Hello, everybody out there in comic book land. My name is George Serrano, aka The Don. And if you're listening and watching this, you can only be here for one reason, a brand new episode of Major Discourse, where we talk to the people in the industry, handling the latest and greatest to come to comic books and comic book media. And I am joined by Simply Sawyer. Sawyer, let people know what's up.
What is up, people?
And boy, we have a hell of an episode today because we are talking to the Pop of Spencer and Locke, the spirit of St. Louis, the one that got away from Newsarama, the puppet master of the Planeteers, the head of Speed Racer's pit crew, the friend of Comic Book Click and godfather of Blip the Monkey, David Pepose. How the hell are you?
I am doing great. What an intro. Thank you so much. I don't think I've had an entrance like that in a long time, but thank you guys so much for having me. Excited to talk all things comics with you today.
Oh, I cannot wait. Your name has been one just ringing in my head since I picked up Spencer and Locke a couple years ago. And it was one of those books that I almost had a hard time trying to explain to people why I dug it so much. I think it has just the right amount of 90s juxtaposition of like heart
Yeah.
and absolute darkness going on there. But even looking at that book and realizing that it was published in 2017, we are working on a decade of David coming up here. That's
Yeah.
that's pretty tremendous there. Um,
Yeah.
with Spencer and Locke, which I
Mhm.
hear happened unusually fast. Looking back now,
Yeah.
do you think that your voice changed at all from that first book, or kind of just revealed it? Like, does it feel like the least disciplined version of you as a writer, or the purest?
That's a great question. I think about that all the time is sort of, there is something with those first books where, especially with Spencer and Locke, where that was a scrappy book. The quick log line for it is, what if Calvin and Hobbes grew up in Sin City? So I knew I was kind of juggling dynamite with that high concept. And I love that book. Warts and all, I think it really was kind of like just lightning in a bottle. Just like you said, it really was sort of me at my kind of purest and rawest and least refined. But I feel like I always say it's the best first book I could have asked for. I felt like, that really kind of that book. People still talk about it. The fact that for our first book, that people still talk about it, almost a decade later is such a gift. But it is interesting. Like I think I wouldn't say that my voice has maybe gotten more refined, I guess,
Okay.
as just with practice. Like I still think like the core elements of it all, very action driven, but also sort of these kind of sad, brooding, broken characters and trying to kind of juggle the mashup subversiveness, but then keeping it the heart, keeping that honest and keeping that I think that's been a tightrope I've walked my whole career. And I think that I don't think has changed. I'd like to think I've gotten better at it. I've certainly gotten faster at it. But yeah, I mean, I think every project you kind of learn different things, and you also you check things off your list, and you realize, sometimes you kind of find different ways to refine your process and streamline your process and figure out ways to, like, how do you still deliver the same amount of impact, but also kind of how do you do it in a way that maybe like feels more sustainable.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely been, I continue to refine the process. I feel like just in the last few years, I've really found ways to kind of like condense what I'm trying to say in a way that like doesn't feel overwritten, but also in a way that, like, how can I kind of speed up how I do that? So um yeah, I feel like the core themes though have always kind of remained the same. And I think kind of the core goals of what I'm trying to make readers feel, that I think luckily I feel like that's been very consistent from the very beginning.
You're a creator after my own heart. I heard in a previous interview you say something along the lines of there wasn't much creative endeavors in St. Louis, but you still found yourself in the medium. Um,
Yeah.
is that just happenstance? Is that determination? Is that just I hear this is
Yeah.
one of the mediums that is really luck based. Sometimes it's just timing, sometimes it's lightning in a bottle. How do you
Yeah.
go from understanding that creative endeavor might not be in the cards to literally being in one of the most creative endeavors one could be in.
I always knew I wanted to do something. Well, I shouldn't say. When I was in college, sort of this idea of, oh, maybe you could do something in the comics industry. That was something that was really interesting to me. Like when I was in high school, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, and then I interned at a law firm in high school, and I did one semester of philosophy of law, and I realized I was not cut out for that whatsoever.
Yeah.
And so, that was I think around like you know beginning of my sophomore year of college that I was sort of like, oh, I don't really, this idea that I thought I was going to do, I'm not doing this anymore. And if I could just kind of spin a wheel and get anything, what would it be? And I was like, oh, working in the comics industry would be interesting. But like you said, I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. There was not really any creative role models, so to speak. And so, I thought maybe I'd want to be an editor. And so I wound up applying at DC. I wound up going through the internship interview process for 3 straight years.
Woo.
And finally, right as I was about to graduate from college, I finally got in. And so I worked with editorial over at DC. I worked on books like Batman R.I.P. and Final Crisis and Green Lantern Secret Origin. And
And your brain is
uh,
still intact from Final Crisis? You were able to,
yeah,
you're able to
that was a trip. I mean, I grew up idolizing Grant Morrison, and so
yeah.
that really was like an amazing experience. It was also the summer of 2008, and so that the '08 recession, there were no jobs to be had at DC, and I remember being a little heartbroken about it. That I was like, oh, I've managed to get my foot in the door, and there's no place for me to kind of like hold on. I was really lucky that I crossed paths with Janelle Asselin, who was then the assistant editor over at Batman under Mike Martz, who is now who I've worked with on Scout's Honor and Devil Wears My Face and now Speed Racer. And she was an alumni at Newsarama, and so Janelle connected me to her former editor Troy Brownfield, who has been a mentor for me for like the last 15 years. We talk multiple times. We talk at least weekly to this
Okay.
day. And so Troy kind of like showed me the ropes at Newsarama, and I became sort of his top reviewer over there, and then eventually kind of taking over the reviews section when Troy retired. And it was a great way, I should say it was nice and double-edged, I should say.
Yeah.
In terms of me learning sort of my creative sensibilities, it was fantastic because I got to learn the lay of the land of how the industry worked and who all the names were. And doing reviews week in and week out really forced me to kind of articulate what do I like and what don't I like. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was kind of building my own toolbox and being like, okay, I really like the way, for example, that Rick Remender paces out action.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, that's something in the toolbox. Um, I really liked the Babs Tarr Batgirl run, and I liked how they were all kind of done in ones that sort of built into a bigger meta story. I was like, okay, that's in the toolbox. Um, and so the problem is that it also sort of put me on some radars, not necessarily in the most positive way. I mean, I always try to be tough but fair. But my editor at Marvel, Tom Brevoort, when before he hired me, he said, I want you to know I know your name, and I don't know many reviewers' names, and so that means you're going to have to work twice as hard. Good enough is not good enough for you.
Yeah.
And I remember telling him at the time, yeah, like hold my feet to the fire. Like, life's too short to make crappy comics. Like I want to be the best I can be. And so anything you can do to help me do that, any suggestions, you let me know. And he wound up hiring me on Savage Avengers a few months later. But I was doing the review scene. I was working a day job at CBS television in New York. I was doing publicity and PR. And I took an editing class at Comics Experience, which is
Okay.
online. Andy Schmidt from Boom Studios runs it. I
Oh,
highly recommend anybody who's interested in getting to know the mechanics of making comics. They're amazing online courses. Um, and I took an editing class with him and Bobby Curnow, now at IDW, and then at IDW as well. spoke about like the day to day of being a comics editor, and I was like, "Oh, I would be bad at this. This is not. I'm not. It's all the hardest parts of my job, all the wrangling and
Yeah.
and all the budgets and all the kind of like organizational work that is not really my forte." And
Right.
I remember thinking like, "Oh man, like this is what am I gonna do? What am I gonna do?" And so, I somebody at CBS recommended I move to Los Angeles. They said, you should you want that office job, you want something that's a little creative, you should do development work. So they're like, you're gonna have to work at a literary desk in Los Angeles, and you're gonna have to prove that you've got story chops. And as I thought about that, I said, it's true. I don't have anything truly creative in my resume. And what's the best way to prove that I can break down a story? What if I made one of my own? And it was real cart before the horse kind of thinking in retrospect. But I wound up writing the first issue of Spencer and Locke, kind of on a lark. I thought Frank Miller was the first comics creator that ever made me realize that like real writers and artists make these things. It was a
Yeah.
Daredevil and Without Fear.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, what's the weirdest thing I could slam against old school Frank Miller? And the idea of Spencer and Locke kind of hit me, this of doing Calvin and Hobbes with it, the idea of a hard-boiled cop, beat up and grinning in the rain, and he's got a stuffed animal. Like, what's that guy's upbringing like? What's his home life like? Like, what if this sort of charming affectation of the imaginary friend is more of a symptom of a darker pathology? And so those questions kind of turned into that first issue, and I was like, "Oh, this was so fun!" Wait, maybe I'll make an outline for a whole mini series. And I kind of tricked myself because it's never been that easy since. I wrote that. And I was like, amazing. Let me see if I can like find like an artist, like maybe we could draw some pages of it, see what that process is like. And I found George Santiago Jr., who had just graduated from Savannah College of Art and Design, and was hungry kind of for his first published work. And Colin Bell, our letterer, he was a Newsarama alum who used to write for me. And
There's that
and then
networking. There's that networking right
yeah.
there. Yeah.
Um, and the late Jason Smith, our colorist, who Taylor Esposito, who's now my letterer on Space Ghost, he was the one who made that connection. And those pages look great. So I was just like, oh, maybe I'll just like send it to editors, just like shop it around. Like it's never gonna go anywhere. It'll be a story to tell my kids someday. And it was a matter of being in the right place at the right time where I was at work, it was after hours. I emailed my PDF to Action Lab. And Dave Dwanch, who was then the submissions editor over there, happened to be in the inbox right as my email hit. So he opened it, read it over, and I'm just catching up on paperwork. It's after hours, and I suddenly get an email like 20 minutes later saying, "How soon do you think you could get this book done?"
Whoa.
And that's when I kind of felt that chill run up my spine where I had kind of dipped my toe in the pool enough times that I tripped and fell in the deep end. And
Right.
suddenly I got to sink or swim. Um, and yeah, thank goodness it all played out the way that it did. I moved to Los Angeles. I was like the world's worst Hollywood assistant. It was a very difficult, no-win kind of situation job. And I was there for about 9 months, and then we started getting reviews of Spencer and Locke. And suddenly places like IGN and Sci-Fi are saying really nice things about the book and me. And that's when it finally kind of dawned on me that like, oh, I could just do this.
Yeah.
Um, and that was sort of the moment where I finally gave myself permission to like take a run at this.
Yeah.
And thankfully I've been more or less gainfully employed ever since. But yeah, it's been a long time coming. It's, everybody, I always say an overnight success is like really the product of like 15 years of hard work.
100%.
Uh, and I guess in this case, I think this year is the 20-year anniversary of my first internship interview at DC.
Whoa.
So I've been kind of running at this half my life now. But I always say it's the hardest but most rewarding job I've ever had.
Yeah.
I really feel like I can live and breathe and eat and sleep this stuff. And I feel like in a career of jobs that I felt like I was maybe a B student at best. This is like the first job that I feel like I could be good at. And so it's
Awesome.
really it just that's what kind of inspires me to get up and try to deliver my A game every day is just I know what a privilege it is to be able to do this. And I'm so grateful to really the village of, fans and retailers and press and editors and collaborators who have all kind of championed me at every turn. I wouldn't be here without just the army of people that have brought me here. And so I'm grateful every day for it.
That no, that's amazing, and you deserve every ounce of success that you've achieved.
Thank you.
I love your voice in these books, and I know that with being able to pitch, create our own books, you have your
Yeah.
elevator pitches. But to me, the core of it always boils down to the human nature of these
Yeah.
characters, regardless of whether or not it's in space, whether or not there's a talking cat, or whatever's going
Yeah.
on with this stuff. I sometimes just show. We posted it on Comic Book Click not that long ago. The panel in Spencer and Locke of the changing box, jumping off the
Yeah.
building for the changing box, and me just looking at that and going, "This might be the darkest thing I've seen in a very long time." But
Yeah.
the emotions behind it are real.
Thank
Is
you.
did you have to go somewhere deep for that, or is that an outside sort of uh,
Yeah, I mean,
inspiration there?
I think it's always a little autobiographical, I think I always joke, of my books. I'm like, oh, could a depressed person write these? But I do think like especially, in that time in my life, like I think as I've gotten older, I've maybe mellowed a little bit in the last decade, but I think back then, there was a lot of uncertainty. There was a lot of just I was very directionless. And there was a degree of angst behind all that. And so and I think, the question that has always sort of driven me is it's always been the question of, am I good enough? And so I think that's a question that has certainly um, taken me to some sometimes kind of a little sometimes a little bit of a depressing place. But I think that's been sort of I think the core struggle of my whole life is sort of I wrestle with doubt and then how do I climb out of it?
Okay,
And
yeah,
that I think is maybe the core through line of everything I've ever written
awesome.
is these imperfect, sometimes broken people, and it's the redemptive climb up. And so, and I think that has allowed me to maybe go a little darker with some of the high concepts, knowing that you can start off in that darker place as long as you give them a place to grow, as long as you give
100%.
them a chance to kind of find some meaning. I think we all have our pasts. I think we all have our regrets. I think we all have our scars. I think that's a very relatable human experience. And I think the idea of these characters being able to maybe not forget, but like transcend
Yeah,
their paths, I think is something that I think is very attractive to a lot of people. I think it gives people some hope. It certainly gives me hope,
yeah,
that like tomorrow, as long as you hang on, tomorrow is always a chance to be a better person. Tomorrow
yeah,
is always a chance to kind of turn things around. And I think, the longer that it takes, sometimes the more you value it on the way out.
yeah. I think that um, I I call myself an evangelist for this medium because
Yeah.
I found it also when I was at a bit of a lost period in my life. My
Sure.
father had passed away, and while I grew up religious, I'm not too religious. I'm more
Yeah.
spiritual than I am religious. And
Sure.
yeah, you look for your own path in life. You have to make this mean something, or else,
Yeah.
what is it? And I found solace in comics because they felt like spoonfuls of sugar of just morality plays and
Yeah.
how we should live life, even if we can't reach the same heights how we should. And
Yeah.
um, I wanted to definitely get you on and talk to you because
Yeah.
it's another unique part of this medium. I feel like comic books are extremely personal. You read them
Sure.
in your own head. You hear the voices in your own head. Your pacing is dictated by the author and the artist. But if you sit there on one page for 20 minutes because you want to, that's what
Yeah.
that's what that ends up being. Um, but even in all the unique ways we take this in,
Yeah.
kids are, or anybody, me, who can read these books and see a reflection of themselves, something real, something human.
Yeah.
And that all of a sudden makes everyone feel less alone in a world where we're seemingly more connected than ever, but because I want to say because of money stuff,
Sure.
we're also as separated as we've ever been. To pull more money out of the individual, we've been separated to this
Yeah.
specific point, and it's hard to bring us all together on a single thing. You bring us all together on pancakes, then people start yelling about waffles, and it becomes a whole it becomes a
Yeah.
whole scenario there. But you are putting in. You're using your A game to put in really heartfelt messages in your works, and it's one of those things where I attribute almost the entirety of the success of the absolute universe to exactly what you just said. I
Yeah.
believe that the reason why those heroes are working is because they are all the tenets of what you remember from those heroes, but they don't have the easiest climb up. They don't have the same easy kind of
Yeah.
climb. It's easy to be resourceful when you have all the money in the world. You know, it's
Sure.
easy to be optimistic about humanity when you landed on this planet and you look like everybody, right? And you were welcomed in and hugged and stuff like that. And Diana comes from a princess, a paradise island. Of course, she's gonna love people and have that sort of grace. But if you take those things away, are those people still heroic? And I think that's a lot of your protagonists are people who are the normal people of this world, falling through the cracks, dealing with trauma and all that stuff, but still similar to the absolute universe, despite the cards they were dealt, find a way to inspire, find a way to get the job done. Is that a conscious thing or?
I think it's look, I think I've been reading comics my whole life. I think and I think we're all misfits if you're a comic book fan in some way. Like I can't say I was into sports, like I
Same.
and so I think I'm sure there's a degree of reflection in that. And I think that, the characters who are the misfits, the ones who are on the outskirts, the ones who fell in between the cracks, like they're interesting to me. And I think that's something that makes those characters feel very engaging to me as a reader and as a fan. And so I kind of hope that my readers feel the same way with my books. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think the thing you were saying that I was really kind of, I think, hit the nail on the head is that um, I want there to be some sort of human element to all this. Like, and I think that's been really nice. The sweet spot that I've found myself in, with stuff like Space Ghost and Speed Racer and Captain Planet, and you see it in the Absolute line as well. But like I think it's very easy, particularly the superhero genre, to just lean on the continuity, to just lean on the status quo altering stakes. And I think that the problem is that that's a sucker's game that kind of goes to diminishing returns, I think. And
Yeah.
and for me, I think it all comes down to I write my books for my wife.
Uh-huh.
She's my first and really only reader that I really like I tailor everything for. She's not a comics fan. She's a voracious fiction reader, but
Awesome.
I want to make sure that like the person who's most important to me can understand this act of self-expression that I'm doing. And if she doesn't get it, it means it's too complicated. It means it's too convoluted. It's not human enough. But I think that has sort of, I think, defined kind of my ethos as a creator. Is my opinion is, um, I don't want to preach to the choir. I want converts. I there's always room to build a bigger table. And so that's why I do love doing conventions. I don't do them as much as I have, pre-pandemic, but like I love doing conventions is because there's a lot of people there who have never read a comic or are casual readers at best, and they're intimidated. This idea of, oh, do I need to have read, 60 years of continuity for this thing to make sense? And that's a big reason why the absolute line, you don't have to deal with any of that.
Hmm.
For me, my thought is, how do I make this thing accessible? How do I make it so you don't have to do any homework? That all you have to do is pick up the first book.
Yeah.
And that's been kind of my approach. That's something that I'm pretty militant on, to be honest. It's something I really refuse to budge. Because as somebody who's been reading these things for like 35 plus years, like There are books I zone out at. My eyes glaze over. It's all continuity. I mean, there have been plenty of books that I'm just like, can't finish this. It's not engaging me on an emotional level. And there's so much stuff going on. This world is so stimulating, hyper stimulating as it is, that if you don't have something that's going to hook me on an emotional level, that's going to make me give a damn, it's not worth my time. It's not worth my money.
Right.
And so that's the thing. I'm trying my best to try to always kind of lead with that, is that I want you to care about these characters. I don't take it for granted. Maybe it's because I'm not writing like the A-list franchise characters where that if you're writing Spider-Man or Batman, there will be a certain fairly high floor of sales because people love those characters. I'm not writing those guys. I'm writing, so I got to earn it every single issue.
Hmm.
And as I'm working, I put myself through the ringer often, to make sure that I'm not I'm leaving it all out in the field in that regard.
No, I absolutely love it. You hear sometimes, even with characters like Spider-Man, some people can't keep up because of how
Yeah,
long it is. And this is a medium where you're constantly in the second act. You're not meant to, especially with the bigger
yeah,
characters like that, right? You're not
yeah,
meant to write the ending. You're meant to keep
yeah,
dribbling the ball. And sometimes with certain writers or, certain runs, you're like, all right, I'll come back when you shoot. Like I'll come back when I
yeah.
hear something big has happened, I'll circle around there. But Sawyer was one of the first ones to put us onto the entire speed racer of it all. So I would let Sawyer get some chat in.
Yeah, please.
I love Speed Racer, Space Ghost, Captain Planet. Those IPs that you've done. I love your other stuff too, but what really draws me to you is that IP stuff. But I
Yeah,
think what you just said captures why it draws me to it is I can recommend those things to people freely. I can say you should read this. It's, this many issues and that's it. I
yeah,
you here's not here's a 1,000-page omnibus you have to read. Here's a trade you can read and get a really good story.
yeah.
But it also lets me, you do such a good job with your themes and your emotions that it lets me come to them and also say, here's this character you know and love, but it's not complicated, but it's deep. It's not surface level.
Thank you.
So it's really great. And I am curious about, do you find it easier in within those IPs to work, or when you're doing a Spencer and Locke?
It's different muscle groups. So less like about which one's easier because they all wind up taking a decent amount of work, but it's sort of which work, like for example, doing the IP work like Space Ghost and Speed Racer. I grew up during Captain Planet. I'm 90s
Mhm.
trash. So
Yeah.
like that I didn't necessarily need to do like a huge deep dive. Like I had watched it as it was coming out. I knew those
Hmm.
characters. Obviously, Space Ghost and Speed Racer coming out in the late 60s certainly predate me by like 2 decades. And so
Right, right.
I watched every episode. And so that's very time intensive. That took me a few weeks, where I was just every episode I'm writing the play by play, like really detailed notes. But that's good because I go back to those documents like every single script because I'm constantly like, okay, what's something I can draw from, even if it's just a planet name or a character name? Like, can I sprinkle something in so the diehards know I did my homework? And so for that, you're kind of, you're sort of force feeding yourself a lot of stuff, and you're trying to kind of just let that filter through you as like a creator and as a human being, and what are the things that you're interested in and what are the things that you think are reflective of the property's sort of core appeals, as a concept. And so like for example, Speed Racer, I'm like, okay, like when I got to the episode where Kim Jugger is there, I'm like, okay, that guy is like if Speed was an a-hole. Like okay, that guy sounds like a guy who like would probably kind of put Speed through the ringer a little bit. Or,
Yeah.
oh, the GRX engine, like that's that feels like a big deal.
Mhm.
Or, when I'm watching Space Ghost and I'm like, okay, Metalis has shown up more than any other villain. He's
Yeah.
probably a big deal. And he also is like a foot taller than Space Ghost.
Yes, yes.
Like Like, all right, like this is giving me kind of a sense of, oh, he's the robot master. Okay, cool. And then like Zorak, oh, he's like a giant
Like
praying
David
mantis. Like,
Koresh kind of
yeah, like he doesn't,
cult leader.
yeah, oh, okay, like he's not just Joker, he's the Charles Manson of space. Like, he sees the world in a very alien way than you and I would, just
Mhm.
based in a sheer biology.
Mhm.
And oh, okay, well, if he's the Charles Manson, that means he's got a cult. And oh, if he's got a cult, who do they worship? Oh, Lokar, the other bug guy. And so it kind of like spins out through that. But whereas like if you're doing something, Spencer and Locke is interesting because that was sort of I was sort of a hybrid approach where like I still read all the Calvin and Hobbes strips as I was like developing it. So like I had a pretty good sense of like what I could riff on and what kind of references I could include. But
Yeah.
like some of the original stuff like Scout's Honor is a good one, or Going to the Chapel, sort of a little off the beaten path, or Devil That Wears My Face, honestly, where that you don't have all that stuff to draw from.
Mhm.
I try to do certain bits of research, and I'm always trying to figure out like what's the core character conflict, what's
Yeah.
the sort of thing that's what's the thorn in their paw that they haven't quite gotten the nerve to pull out yet.
Mhm.
Um, and so that it's a little, on the one hand, you're spending less time doing research. On the other hand, you're kind of like, all right, how do I fill that? And so there still winds up often being some degree of research. There often winds up being like just, I have certain, buddies back from my like journalism days who I still, bounce stuff off of where I'm like, hey, is this stupid? Because I know you're not going to BS me here.
Yeah.
And they'll tell me like, oh no, that sucks. Or as I'm typing it, I'm like, oh, that sucks. No way. So there's less expectations, but that means that you really then have to like, okay, it's not, you're not drawing from other material. You got to really kind of come up with what you got to fill that on your own. So they take, I guess it's less time to do the creator own stuff, because I don't have to watch like 50 something episodes of something
Yeah.
to make sure I haven't missed like an important episode. But that's kind of, they're both challenging, we'll just say.
That's another thing that knowing that makes a lot of sense that you've seen all those episodes of those
Yeah.
cartoons is because something you do so effectively for me is each single issue is like an episode of the cartoon where
Yeah.
there is an overarching story, but if I just read number 4 of Speed Racer, I
Yeah.
get a self-contained story.
Thank
Hmm.
you. Well,
So, but to kind of follow up with the Speed Racer of it all, like George
yeah.
said, I'm curious because I also review Racer X.
Yeah.
Uh, so I'm curious how involved you are creatively with those guys, and then the
Yeah.
various teams on Tales from the Road as well,
Yeah.
where all that meshes, I guess.
Sure. Well, so as far as the various kind of Speed Racer spin-off books, like my goal has always been like fairly hands off. Like I'm not trying to step on anybody's toes. Our editor Chaz Pangburn, like he would kind of funnel scripts my way just in a sense of like, hey, is there anything here that's like contradicting the rules of like what of the world that we've established? Is there anything that's going to contradict the main series? But like when me and Mark Russell were kind of brought on for Speed Racer and the Racer X spinoff, like Mark was like, oh, I want to do like a Rashomon take of the main book. And so, just sort of seeing that world from Racer X's perspective
Right.
and sort of spinning off into, the things he's doing when he's not on the page.
Yeah.
And so like I've read most of those issues when time permitted, just to
Yeah.
be like, okay, here's what we got. I also, knowing that was going to be a thing, when I filed my full outline for Speed Racer to Mad Cave and to Tatsunoko, I made it very detailed. It was probably 30 something pages. And everything was laid out, including like page to page beat sheets, because I was just like, I want to make sure that anybody who's working on this universe knows exactly where we're headed.
Mhm.
And that way, like, it minimizes the ability for there to be crossed wires and things like that. So yeah, I've read certain of the scripts. Like, I'm trying to think. There's some of the Tales from the Road ones I've read. Like, I know when Mark London did his Racer X thing, I remember reading over kind of the outline that he did. Although I was so blown away when I saw the actual thing, because he really let Sebastian Perez kind of, like, cut loose on that.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful.
So yeah, I mean, there's no, like, real system that, like, I mean, every publisher has its own system, I should say. Like what we've done with the Speed Racer books is very different than, say, when I was writing like the spin-off Moon Knight book over at
Mhm.
Marvel.
Yeah.
But I will say, the other thing that I want to just circle back to that you mentioned, that I just want to give some shout outs for it, that the done in one approach, which is something that I kind of rolled the dice with that on Space Ghost, and it really seemed to pay off. So I've been kind of incorporating that with Speed Racer as well.
Yeah.
The done in one, done in two approach. And um, that came about. I wrote a two-parter on Fantastic Four during the Judgment Day crossover. And my editor, Tom Brevoort, like, he was like, you have two issues to do this. And at first we had talked about doing two one-shots. And I was like, well, the idea of like a two-parter, that cliffhanger hits hard.
Hmm.
And seeing what, like, later what Ryan North did on the main Fantastic Four book, where he started off with a lot of done in ones. And I remember being so impressed with how much story he was able to fit into a normal 20-page count. That guy's like a musician, like there's not an ounce of fat on those books.
Mhm.
Um, and so thinking about that, thinking about books like Batman the Long Halloween,
Mhm.
which is a lot of sort of standalone chapters that kind of make a cohesive whole. Um, when Dynamite approached me to do Space Ghost, and they said, we can give you a year. And I said, could you give me 12 and an annual? Because then I think I could get you something kind of Batman Long Halloween meets The Mandalorian. And we rolled the dice. I had no idea how that was going to turn out. It was a calculated risk. I was like, I hope that people like this approach because of this approach, and not because people like Ryan North, because I'm not Ryan North. And thankfully, the risk paid off, and that approach seemed to really click. And so by the time we hit like issue 4, people started to realize, oh, this this book isn't going away. And that it's not slowing down in terms of consistency. And I really want to give a shout out to Jonathan Lau and Andrew Dahlhaus and Taylor Esposito, because, like, we've been on the book now a little over 2 years, and more to come. And the fact that we have, knock on wood, been able to kind of maintain the book with the same team that whole time,
Right.
um, feels increasingly unheard of. And I think
Yeah.
the further we get with it, the longer we can keep this team together. I mean, I'd like to get us to 50 issues, and I think there's a
Let's
chance
do
we
it.
might.
Hey,
Uh,
let's do it.
you know,
I'm
so,
all in for
uh,
that for sure.
uh, but yeah, I think that, Tom Brevoort was the one who really kind of was the one who said you should try the done in one approach. We had talked about it with my Punisher miniseries, and obviously with 4 issues, it's a lot harder to kind of make that work. But I took that lesson. And so, anything you like, that I've been doing lately, honestly, you should be thanking Tom Brevoort just as much as, my editors, Joe Rybant, Chaz Pangburn, and all my collaborators, Jonathan Lau and Davide Tinto, and the rest. Because if it wasn't for Tom sort of putting that bug in my ear, these books would be very different, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. To the Fantastic Four of it all, we just covered AXE Judgment Day for the Eternals 50th
Yeah,
anniversary.
yeah,
With Jack Kirby created them, and I love the Fantastic Four of it all because we're literally dealing with a threat that's trying to take out the entire world.
yeah,
The Fantastic Four story has to do with Reed's world and
yeah.
how he keeps that intact. And it goes back to this idea that it doesn't always have to be a universal ripping event. It could just be something affecting his life and his family and what he would choose to stand up for that. So, tremendous work on that
Thank you.
because I thought that really sung. With Space Ghost,
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time when I was young with my grandma. My mom was a single mom, so she was working, and my
Yeah.
grandmother from Puerto Rico didn't really speak much English, so she would sit me in front of the TV and I'd watch a ton of Hanna-Barbera. A bunch of Hanna-Barbera. But I was telling Sawyer, I don't know how much of the lore I remembered. I know I was
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
entertained, and I know
Yeah.
that I had fun watching it. And so, I'm reading Space Ghost, and I have both the equal parts of, like you said, I get the Batman vibes, I get the Dark Knight Returns vibes of like these kids earning their spot on the team, not just, like he's not a babysitter. It's funny because the people who know me know that that's kind of one of the tropes I don't dig is like when
Yeah.
they give like Punisher or Wolverine like a side character that they have to now babysit. And I don't feel
Sure.
like Space Ghost is babysitting those kids. Those kids are right there with them, running and
Yeah.
gunning, and
Yeah.
they earn their spots. But I'm sitting there and I'm like, Brack, Zorak. I'm like, I know these people, like Moltar, like these. It's that Ratatouille meme of eating the soup
Yeah.
and going getting transported back.
That's great. That's what a compliment. Thank you.
No,
Um,
100%. But the core of that book is this found family. Is
yeah.
Dax like dealing with all the baggage he has on himself and then realizing that he has more baggage kind of or
Yeah.
has more purpose
Yeah.
with these kids being around. Kudos to you not writing annoying kids.
Thank you.
Because I think that we come from an era where they
Yeah.
used to just throw kids in all of our media to give us kind of a point of view character, and some of them work and some of them don't. I never
Yeah.
found myself annoyed by Jan and Jace. I'm like, I'd hang out with those kids.
Thank
They seem
you.
pretty much on the up and up. But also like watching Speed Ghost, Space Ghost,
Yeah.
watching Space Ghost. I almost feel like you're doing equal parts of like Batman and Superman. I'm seeing Superman panels of him, lifting stuff up and just
Yeah.
charging through, and um,
Yeah.
I love it. I love it.
I, thank you. Well, yeah, it's funny. I do think a lot about I'm like, yeah, like of course Batman is like the core part of Space Ghost DNA. Just he came right on the heels of Adam West's Batman. And so
Hmm.
that was Hanna-Barbera trying to get a piece of that pie.
Yeah,
And but yeah, I mean, of course, there's lots of iconography from Superman, from Wolverine and Punisher, even,
yeah.
a little bit of Iron Man, a little bit of Green Lantern. Which is great for me as the mashup guy who, I'm able to take kind of all these influences and then a bunch of other genre influences and just like throw them in a blender and just be like, okay, like it's a little bit of a Rorschach test,
Mhm.
where I'm like, okay, especially now that we're on this, and we've been on this for a while and we've got more to come is now, by the time I'm done with this run, I'll probably have gone through almost every, if not every viable villain
Yeah.
in the whole roster. And so it becomes one of those like, okay, like what do I feel when I see this character? Or hey, there's like a need there's a type of story I want to tell. Like what could this character which character could slot into this? Or hey, that's an interesting thing from that episode, an interesting dynamic. Like I could probably kind of use that here. But yeah, it's funny you mentioned, and we talked about this earlier about, books being a little bit autobiographical. You always kind of draw from your own experiences as a person. And it took me I think like 3 issues. I think it was is after I was starting to work on issue 4 that I realized like, oh, my younger siblings are triplets. We have about a
Oh,
nine
okay.
year
That's
gap
very
between
unique.
us.
Yeah.
And I realized as I was writing issue 4, I was like, oh, this book is about the day I started counting everything in threes.
Yeah.
Where, I had a good thing going, I had my own system. And then suddenly, 3 babies show up and
Hmm.
my whole life changes overnight. And it's a learning curve. And, they're not up to speed, obviously.
Right.
And they've got a lot to learn, but also I've found that, they've got very strong personalities and they have a lot to teach. And so yeah, like, I think that kind of comes down to the heart of it. And I think also, just watching the show, you meet Jan and Jace and Blip before you meet Space Ghost in that first episode.
Yeah.
So I think that was kind of like a sign. Like, I don't know if they did focus group testing back then, but if it seems like they must have, because the idea of having not just a boy sidekick, but a girl sidekick for girls to watch, and then a monkey because monkeys were so popular in the Silver Age, like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Like, of course, like everybody's got a point of view character. And so yeah, having those characters kind of be the Tim and Lex to Space Ghost Dr. Grant for any Jurassic Park fans.
Yeah.
That became, I think, kind of like the cornerstone of the whole run, is just this idea of like this widower who's got his own trauma and tragedy, but is also just a grouch who's like
Yeah.
rough around the edges and ready to throw hands at the slightest provocation. It's a guy who's like purposefully pushed his own humanity down. He literally, puts on a mask and calls himself Space Ghost. Um, but you can't keep that act up when you've got
No.
these two effervescent kids running around in jetpacks.
Hmm.
Eventually, like, yeah, he's going to teach them how to survive, but also they're going to kind of force him to kind of drop the act a little bit and force him to confront some of his own kind of past traumas, but also to kind of let them go.
Yeah.
That he is able to move on. He is able to sort of find this new family, and it doesn't mean that he's forgotten his wife and child that were killed in Metallus's invasion, but it gives him something else to live for beyond just what's the next pirate I'm going to punch in the face. And
100%.
so, yeah, but that book, and I can tell you as somebody who I have my first kid on the way now, and I can tell you, like, the Space Coast Annual, I think, is going to be coming out right around when my baby's due, and you're going to see it, and you're going to be like, oh, well, yeah, I guess a guy with a kid on the way probably would have written something like this.
Right, right.
So it does kind of reflect, and uh, yeah, that book in particular, it's a special book. It feels like I keep kind of discovering new things, not just about the character, but like kind of my own internal operating
Yeah.
system a little bit. Every time I kind of write something new. But
It's interesting how you put that because, and even when you were talking about this IP stuff, we started this covering media, comic book movies, comic book TV, because that was the easiest stuff at the time.
yeah,
And like you have these IPs and your first thought is this stuff already worked at some point. So
yeah,
let's keep the core here. And I can
yes,
see where I can add, I can see where they left blank spaces to either elongate someone's story or, add these flourishes. And I
yeah,
feel like Hollywood always thinks they know better than the than
the
the
source material.
actual, yeah, the source material. And it just feels weird because the thing what you just said about Space Ghost and Jan and
Yeah,
Jace is how I feel about Batman and the Bat Family. And we haven't
yeah,
gotten really the Bat Family in media, like in film. And so he's stuck in this perpetual grouchy,
yeah,
I'm never gonna have family stuff. And I remember I watched Lego Batman, and that whole
yeah,
movie is about the family forcing itself on him. Like, regardless if you
yeah,
care or not, we're here, we love you. Be a grouch, it doesn't matter. We're still gonna hug you and make you cookies, because
yeah,
we dig you. And that you keyed in on something that I think that even some of the biggest people in the industry are not understanding about some of these characters in regards to their growth. Because for every Punisher, Wolverine, like you said, are these dark and gritty characters, they mean nothing without the glimmers of light. If they're just going to
yeah,
be, dark for the sake of dark, I'm getting a bit, and this is, no offense to anyone, but I'm
yeah,
getting like a bit the boys out, like I'm getting a bit,
sure,
drained from that. And
yeah,
for every one of those books, there's a book that you've written where you say, yeah, life is that dark, but despite that, this person is still going to try to,
yeah.
persevere. And
I
that
don't
means a
want to.
lot.
I don't ever want to write anything that's like oppressive,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
like life's hard enough in the year of our Lord 2026 in the United
Mhm.
States of America. Like, if I want to be depressed, I'll read the news. Life is too short, and frankly, it's a weird truth I've discovered now that I'm a creator is the amount of time that a reader will spend engaging with my work, even if it's something that really resonates with them, it is a fraction of the time and emotional investment that the creator puts into
Yes,
it. And
yes,
and we put ourselves through the ringer. I certainly put myself through the ringer at least on the books that do have that uplifting curve to it. Boy, if I was just like writing just like nihilism for like the sake of nihilism, like man, like I don't know if I could handle it. I got too much to live for. I feel like
100%.
I will say, like, the books that I haven't been able to kind of like tap into that as much, like my Punisher miniseries is one of the hardest things I've ever written. Not just because of kind of the various different elements that like I wanted to incorporate and that Marvel wanted to incorporate and on a very accelerated runway, but it was
Hmm.
just like, Punisher's tough. Like he doesn't have a sense of humor. He can come across as very stoic. He doesn't really have even a big supporting cast.
Yeah, that's true.
And so and the Punisher as a character, and I wrote this in Savage Avengers, and I kind of felt this way writing, my Punisher miniseries, is as a human being, he is at a dead end. Like he's a dead man walking. It just the bullet hasn't hit him yet.
Yeah.
But like that's a tricky character to write because there's no saving him from this. Like he wallows in this. Um, and I always say like if I can have one character that can crack jokes, I'm good.
Yeah.
Like that's why I love writing Jace. That's why I loved writing Flash Thompson and Savage Avengers. Like if I can have somebody who can crack a joke, it makes my life a lot easier. And it also just makes the thing like just a little lighter on its feet. Because like I said, I mean, look, like, there are plenty of depressing books out there and, but man, I don't want to write it. That's not me. Life's too short and this takes too much out of me. And frankly, every book puts something back into me.
Yeah.
And the more depressing it is, the harder it is to kind of shake that stuff. So I try to steer clear of it when I can.
I um grew up wanting to write. I went to middle school. It was to the point where like I used to write in second grade, and they would bring me to the fifth grade classes to read my work and kind of
Yeah.
yell at the fifth graders to be like, "Why aren't you writing like this second grader?" Eventually, before I graduated out of that school, when I got to fifth grade, my fifth grade teacher told me there was no money in writing. And so I should possibly think of other avenues. And so, right out of high school, I went to the military for 4 years
Mhm.
and to two tours overseas. And I came back, and life just got more complicated as it does.
Sure.
I say all that to say that a lot of the character, you seem to have a beat on this whole like military or sort of the mission.
Yeah.
The mission is first.
Yeah.
One of the things that I had to come to terms with is that heroes are not the only people that experience trauma. Villains
Sure.
experience trauma as well, and it's how they respond to it that dictates what side of the aisle they're going to fall on.
Yeah.
And I guess what I'm asking is, what interests you about resilience as a like storytelling tool for
Yeah.
these characters? Because like I said, as someone who's had to put the mission first, who's had to, it doesn't matter if I miss my family, it doesn't matter if I'm not in another country. Ooh, muted that. Doesn't matter if doesn't matter what's going on in my head. It's for the mission. It's for the greater good. It's for something bigger than me. And I found that in Scout's Honor. I found that. I mean, when you're dealing with the entirety of the church in the devil wears my face. Like there are people who have a higher calling and are putting their own personal baggage aside to continue that mission. What is it about that sort of thing that interests you in as far as writing?
It's interesting because like I think especially for, it's funny, the books that you mentioned, Scouts of Honor and Devil, it's one of those things. There is that greater mission, but I always find that it does wind up coinciding with that kind of personal crisis of faith. That's really the thing in those two books in particular. Is it is somebody who they thought they kind of knew how their world worked, and then the rug got pulled from underneath them, and so they're kind of a little shell shocked. They're sort of just trying to find their bearings while sort of this bigger stuff is happening all around them. And they're like, I won't be able to get to the truth unless I survive this thing, unless
Yeah,
I take care of this thing. I won't be able to wrap my head around it. But like I think there's a couple things that I think maybe go into that. Like, I mean, some of it is I've not served in the military, but once upon a time I was a newspaper reporter. That
okay,
was my first job. That was my first job out of college. The Berkshire Eagle in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. I was
awesome.
there for 2.5 years, and I'd worked in newsrooms all around the country. I'd interned there, all around the country before that, and I wound up finding myself on the local military beat, where like I
Okay.
did a lot of interviews with people coming home. I did a lot of interviews as far as like the local VA, um, and that was really eye-opening to me of of sort of people who had seen things overseas and then were just like trying to kind of reacclimate back to to civilian life. And I wound up bringing a lot of that to my Kickstarter book, the OZ, which
Yeah.
will be returning sometime this year, as soon
Awesome.
as we get the lettering filed for that. Um, but I think what you said about resilience being a core theme, it's funny. I hadn't, again, you learn stuff about yourself with all these books, and that question, you really kind of, I've never been asked that before, but I think you're dead on. And I think it kind of speaks to something that uh, that's a value my mother always really kind of impressed in me
Okay.
was resilience. This idea that life kicks you, and it's very understandable for you to get kicked by life and not want to get back up. But I think something that she always really instilled in me, and I think it's the reason why I'm still in this business, because you get kicked all the time in this business, is you get kicked, you lick your wounds, you get back up. And the thing is you'll eventually get kicked again. You'll get kicked from, it's always from the most unexpected place. But I think everything that's good in my life has come from getting kicked, licking my wounds, and then getting back up. And I think that's a core ethos of the superhero genre in particular. Something that Tom Brevoort really instilled in me. I respect that guy so much because of all the lessons that I learned from him.
Yeah.
He said the thing that makes superheroes super heroic, we'll say, is not punching out the bad guy. It's about saving the little guy
Hmm.
and the lengths that they will go to do that. And sometimes that means getting their butt kicked. But if it
Hmm.
means that they save somebody, in fact, our most recent issue of Space Ghost really kind of encapsulates that,
Yeah.
where I twisted myself into knots to figure out a way to fit all this in, and I'm glad we made it work. But you know, Tempest the Time Master beats the hell out of Space Ghost, and the twins are like, "We got to run. Let's book it to the Phantom Cruiser immediately. Like you can't handle this." And then Tempest is like, I have a guard. I have one of the guards, and I will murder each and every one of these guards until you show yourself. And the kids are like, you're gonna die if you do this. And he's like, I don't have a choice. Like,
Yeah.
I will not let anyone else get hurt because of me. And so I think that kind of noble core of self-sacrifice and willing to kind of face whatever hardships comes, that is what makes Space Ghost a hero.
Yeah.
That's the reason he took in Jan and Jace in the beginning when, he could have
Left
left
them
them
right
fend for
there.
themselves. He
Yeah.
could have, like, let alone, training them, to
Yeah.
defend themselves as his partners. So yeah, I think that core of resilience, and I think that's a core part of most good fiction
Yeah.
is, that's the mechanic, is that you have a character who deals with hardship, and how do they eventually face it? How do they hopefully beat it, unless it's a tragedy? But even in the face of a tragedy, I think the good tragedies, they still put up a hell of a fight
Yeah.
on the way down. And so yeah, I think so yeah, I guess to really just answer your question, the themes of resilience, I got that from my mom.
That's amazing. So yeah.
Your body of work serves as such a strong collage of all these things that make you the person you are today. Just like you said, you got your resilience from your mom.
Yeah.
You've taken a lot from your time with Tom Brevoort. Your time with your various jobs, and I think that's so awesome. I think that's something that a lot of writers struggle with is personalizing books in a way that doesn't overtake everything else. And I think that's something you do so effectively is putting yourself on the book without making it, without, like I said, overtaking everything else. Is that something you do consciously or not so much?
Well, I think it's a survival mechanism. I think if I don't kind of put my own personal voice to it, my own personal spin on it, I'm gonna be in for a world of hurt. I think the books that I have been able to put the least amount of personal spin on have been the hardest to write, and I think have been maybe my have not hit in the same way that the books that I've been able to kind of have a little bit more free reign.
Yeah.
So, and so you're always kind of trying to figure out like how do you make this personal? My cable miniseries was actually a recent example of all that, where I didn't necessarily have as much free reign as I would say a Space Ghost or Speed Racer. When Tom approached me on that book, he was like, "Listen, I really want to do kind of like a time travel romance miniseries with Cable." And he sort of had a couple of broad strokes ideas, but like the idea of Cable falling in love with a freedom fighter in the future while being hunted down by this, like, this mysterious killer. And then we find out that, like, spoilers for anyone who hasn't read Cable, Love and Chrome, cover your ears if you don't want spoilers. We find out that this villain that's been hunting Cable, it's actually a future version of this woman that Cable has fallen in love with, who's been radicalized through kind of Cable's time travel nonsense. And I remember thinking at the time, I was like, oh, it's a 5-issue miniseries to tell this story, like in a world where Domino exists and has been around for many decades. Like, how do you convincingly tell that story in 5 issues with where it's a love interest that statistically will probably never be seen again,
Right.
unless another writer decides that they like the character and wants to inject Avery somewhere else or
Yeah.
Cicada somewhere else. Um, how do you make that into 5 issues and make that convincing? And so I was walking with my wife and I was kind of batting out ideas, and she said, "Well, what's Cable's deal? Like, what's the thing that makes him unique? Like, as somebody who's not a comics reader." And I was like, Cable, boy, let me tell you, of
Yeah.
all the convoluted X-Men characters, Cable is the most X-Men of X-Men. But there's other time travelers and there's other gun guys and there's other telepaths and telekinetics. And it wasn't until I was like, oh, but he's got this techno-organic virus that's like killing him. And my wife's like, you should write about that. And that was like the light bulb that made the whole thing go off, where I was just like, oh yeah, like it's the Fault in Our Stars
Yeah.
with the
Ticking
techno-organic
clock.
virus.
Yeah.
Like this is a guy who like every day could be the last one, and he's sort of been tunnel visioning his way through his whole life because otherwise, this idea of his powers someday failing and this thing of inevitably killing him terrifies him as it would anybody. And what happens when he meets somebody? He finally meets somebody else who's got the same thing and does not have the luxury of telekinesis to hold it back. And so that makes the short miniseries runway work because it's a doomed romance. And so they got to go hard and fast with it. And there's a lot of emotion and stakes involved. And what happens when the inevitable happens? And Cable, as a time traveler, does not handle the breakup well, like and is trying over and over and over again to fix things, and time does not want this to happen.
Mhm.
And so that was a book that sort of on its face, I had a kind of a checklist of things that my editors wanted me to hit, but
Yeah.
I was still able to kind of pivot in a way that that book felt still personal to me, that it felt like I was exploring some emotional territory that was very challenging. Talking about like books that can sometimes be a little depressing, like that one, certainly,
Yeah.
having to go in depth on mortality for like, I think I worked on that book. It was like, it was a 6-month commitment or something like that.
Yeah.
That's a lot. I needed to write. I'm glad I was writing Space Ghost, and then Speed
To balance
Racer
it out.
and landed on the heels of that, so I could like kind of, make it a little lighter. But yeah, so it really is like every book. Ideally, you're leading with just your own take in your own concept and whatever kind of appeals to you. It doesn't always happen. especially with the licensed books, um, or like, and that includes Marvel and DC superheroes. That sometimes your publisher or your licensor or your editor will say like, "Hey, this is the concept that we want to kind of work within," and you kind of have to weigh, you know, can you sort of can you play it straight and still like kind of make it feel satisfying to you as somebody who's got to kind of live this thing? Or can you inject a little bit of yourself so it still feels like you? Or just like, you know, do you just say I can't do that? I've had projects before where like I've been approached where they're like, it's this very specific thing that we want done, and I'm like, I don't have it in. I don't have a through line for this. It's a lesson that I've had to learn over the 10 years since I sold my first book is you don't always say yes. It's not a power play. It's literally just you will never regret turning down an assignment that you don't feel 100% on.
Yeah. But
Whereas
you'll regret taking on one
but you
that
will
you
regret taking on an assignment that you are kind of like, I don't know, because chances are if you're like wobbly on it, it's for a reason. And I've had a book or two where I said yes, and then I spent the whole time kind of being like, oh boy,
miserable.
I made it on the other side, but it was certainly it was tricky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sawyer actually has to dip out, but I still want
Sure.
to bend your ear for a bit. Sawyer,
Please.
did you want to ask a final question or final thoughts for David
I
while we
don't
have him?
have a parting question, but I do just want to say thank you. You are writing some of my favorite comics coming out right now, and I do say that a lot, but I have a lot of favorite comics, so don't feel bad about it.
Good. I listen, you should have a lot of favorite comics. And I appreciate you reading mine. I appreciate all the support that you've given my work. I was saying it right before we started recording, is that I'm a big fan of the work you've been doing, Sawyer, with these reviews. I think they're very thoughtful and in depth, and I'm sure they take a long time to write. So thank you for taking the time to write about our books. But yeah, as I say, you keep reading them and I'll keep writing them.
All right, absolutely. Thank you very much. That means a lot. Y'all enjoy the rest of the conversation.
Of
Yeah,
course, have
yeah.
a good one.
You
Thanks,
too.
Sawyer. I'm a bit curious about
Yeah,
editorial
sure.
with the IPs that you are managing. Are you getting heavy notes? Is someone like, no, Space Ghost has four buttons on the fright gauntlet and
No, well, so to break down your question a little bit, because there's little bits and pieces that are slightly different in that,
okay,
um, you know, for a creator-owned project, most of the time your editors they're making sure that you're delivering things on time, but like, you know, and every once in a while they will say, hey, like, here's an idea. You know, I've been lucky in that those times usually it's always been I've asked, I've just been
okay,
like, hey, I'm not sure about this thing or the other thing. What do you think? Like Christina Harrington, who did really the lion's share of the editing on The Devil That Wears My Face, and one of my favorite editors in the whole business. She is amazing. Like there were bits and pieces in Devil that I was like, hey, Christina, like, what do you think about? I
yeah,
could go either way on this, and she led me in the right direction. So, the creator owned stuff, it's usually pretty minimal. They kind of know what, like, once they've approved kind of the core outline, and I go especially detailed in those outlines, they know
okay,
what they're in for. And then there's the superhero books, the Marvels and DCs of it all, where um they're less, I mean, it depends on the editor. Like, sometimes the editor says, hey, we need to get this character from point A to point B.
hmm,
We need this thing to happen. And sometimes they'll kind of say, hey, like, here's sort of a broad story concept that we would like. Other times, they've been a little more open, like Savage Avengers, for example, like that was all me. Um,
awesome,
like the little bits and pieces, like we had to play kind of 20 questions in terms of which characters were available
right,
to populate that roster. Like I had asked for Dakin, for example.
yeah, yeah,
I love that
Akihiro,
character. I love that character. And I had asked for Carnage, not knowing that Rom V was going to be launching that Carnage series.
Yeah.
And so like we kind of did horse trading where like I got Flash Thompson and Weapon Age instead.
Awesome.
Um, but there are other stories where like, there there are other constraints is too strong of a word, but they're sort of they're saying like, okay, you've got two issues on Fantastic Four. It's got to incorporate this thing with Axe Judgment Day. What do you got? Or I did a Miles Morales short where like Devin Lewis, our editor, was like, listen, I want Miles kind of dealing with the aftermath of being possessed by Carnage. Um, and um, and sort of having a heart to heart with his dad over all
Yeah.
that. So that was like, okay, great, I can run with that. Um, Sometimes though, you get a great editor like Tom Brevoort, who like he still, every time I do a book with him, he'll hold my feet to the fire and he'll be like, that doesn't really like pass muster like that, like I don't know about this. And he's one of the best in the business for a reason, like laser guided storytelling instincts. And then the licensors, which is I think the question that you were kind of
Yeah.
angling at. And every licensor is different. Is that I've been really lucky. Right now, I'm working with really chill licensors. Warner Brothers has been the best licensor I've ever worked with by a huge margin. They 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 get what we're going for with Space Ghost. They are on board with it. They are enthusiastic about it. They have gone above and beyond in ways that a licensor does not need to.
Awesome.
Um, and because they believe in the book and they believe in what Jonathan and I are doing. So they are amazing. I don't think I've gotten a note, knock on wood,
You're getting one
on
tomorrow?
Space Ghost since like issue 4 of the first volume.
Wow. Okay. So
And
they've
it,
been kind of
and
letting you
that was an
rock.
art note. That was like a hey, can we make the blood splatter on Zorak's reveal? Can we have it that it's negative so like, you don't see that it's blood
Yeah.
on
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure, sure. Um, Tatsunoko has also been amazing. They have really kind of, I think by virtue of me sending such a detailed outline, like they've been like, okay, like we approved it, like, and they've been pretty good. As far as that's concerned. That's not always the case. I've worked with licensors who are a bit more particular, where, they'll say, oh, well, like this character in this space, like these people wouldn't be able to do this thing. And I'm like, okay, and it becomes like a back and forth of just like, you know, can you tell me like what's the continuity here that I need to inject? I don't want to step on toes, but it's also how do we kind of come to that happy medium of just like, but it's still the story that you approved. I do kind of have a bit of a hard line in the sand of when there's something that's been approved. The approval needs to be honored, because otherwise, then like you're just opening yourself up to like a million unpaid revisions.
Yeah.
Um, but I've been really pretty lucky in terms of the licensors, that like Warner Brothers and Tatsunoko have been so excellent, that like, and I think by virtue of those books coming out in with the kind of freedom that we've had, it kind of self-perpetuates a little bit,
Okay.
where like there are other licenses that like that I'm sort of in conversations with on now that are a little bit, we're taking a little bit more of an off the beaten path kind of approach with it. But by virtue of Space Ghost and Speed Racer being that the way that they are, it increases the chances that, something that's a little more out of left field might get
Yeah.
approved by the licensor because they can see what I've done elsewhere. So um, yeah, it is different though. And the thing about comics and editors and licensors is you never know what you're gonna get,
Right.
until you're in the thick of it. Um, and there have been short things that I've worked on that I've gotten way more notes on than like I've gotten on like in the entirety of Space Ghost and Speed Racer. So it really is just kind of, it's like a game of Minesweeper. You don't really know when you're going to set something off, but you just kind of, that's when you work with a licensor, you got to just be sure that you're able to kind of roll with it and talk with them and get a sense of like, you guys know the lore way better than I ever will. So how do we kind of use that lore to make this story work?
Yeah. I've heard horror stories and they mostly center around some licensors just not getting the comic genre. in general?
Sure, I've definitely heard those stories as well.
So like more panels, more words on this page, or like
Thankfully,
that's not
knock
how
on
that works.
wood, I've never gotten those kinds of notes before, but it's always been sort of like the deep in the continuity weeds,
Yeah.
of like, you know, or I did have one where like they said like, oh, the character doesn't feel like the way like feels too didn't quite match the voice that they were aiming for, and so
Uh,
and some of that is just vibes, and it sounds like it's a lot of work, but it actually isn't that much work to fix. Like I think it's sometimes somebody just you just need to read it a second time, and
yeah.
and you're like, oh, actually that was fine. So but thankfully, like I said, the lion's share of the licensor work has been really painless. So shout out to Warner's and Tatsunoko. Good crew, all of them.
Awesome. Um, as far as concessions are
Yeah.
concerned, is that are there hills to die on, or are you because you are being hired, it's mostly like, well, okay,
Well,
fine. If that's what you said should happen, then that's what you said should happen. If
you,
that's what you
you
want that person to say, then we'll just do that.
well, I think you do pick your battles.
Okay.
Like and I think for me it's always sort of the broad like this is the story that I pitched and that you approved. And so, I had a short license thing where like I pitched a story, the story was approved, and then they were throwing they were there that one was it was multiple people reading it, so they had conflicting notes, and like
That's great.
I had somebody who was like they kept trying to throw in stuff that was like kind of directly contradicting the core concept of the thing that they had approved. And so like
Right.
then I kind of, I asked my editors, I was like, listen, like I can do one thing or this other thing, but like the two things together don't work. Like, can can you help navigate this for me? And they've been pretty good. But otherwise, I mean, like, I think, for example, writing for Marvel or DC, very often it's a degree. There's always concessions to be made.
Mhm.
Because like you're writing a team book and you're not going to get there's the likelihood of you getting every single character that you pitched for is so small, because all it would have taken was like somebody doing like a Black Knight miniseries right when I was doing Savage
Yeah.
Event. Be like, oh nope, sorry, can't get Dane. You got to get
Yeah.
Dane's daughter or something.
We just killed that
Uh,
character in the last issue, so
yeah,
sorry.
yeah. Or, Akihiro's over in the Marauders book that Steve Orlando's writing, so you can't use him. He can't be in two books. He's not that popular.
Right, right.
And so, um, there are certain things that you just are kind of like, all right, can I find like an alternative that I'm happy with and that I think I can make work? Or is this something that is like more systemic, more like, more important to the core meaning of the story? Like I can tell you that, like, for example, and I say this with love because, Tom has always told me that if you have a better idea than I have, you let me have it because there's always room to kind of tweak these things. But he and I, we got into quite a few discussions about the ending of Cable, Love and Chrome,
Okay.
because Tom wanted Cable to forget all of it too.
Uh,
And I don't usually push back on Tom, but I pushed back really hard on that because I was like, no, like if he forgets about it, we let him off easy
yeah.
because then there's no, there's no
Like
you know, he,
baggage. He
there's
doesn't
no
have,
baggage.
yeah,
Like the
yeah,
fact that he has the potential to pull the thread and undo the whole thing all over again out of love for this woman, and he decides not to. That
yeah.
he's like this, this is the greater good is to leave her alone and leave her out of this. She got her second chance, and that's got to be good enough, even if it's without me. And I feel really good about that ending. And so those are the sort of things you do kind of try to stick to your guns. And again, no two projects are the same, no two editors are the same. Like sometimes you got to pick your battles, and sometimes you got to know like you got to fight as best you can, and sometimes you're still going to get overruled. There's definitely been projects where there have been things that I'm like, oh, come on, like, and nope, got overruled, and I'm like, all right. Um, the advantage is that I nobody is going to be as quite as critical of my work as I am. So
Yeah.
I have been lucky in that like 90% of the things that like it goes to the printer and I'm like, oh, nobody ever notices. So
Right.
that makes me feel a little bit better about the inevitable compromises you make doing any sort of commercial creativity.
Yeah. It's one of those things where, like I said, we started in media, and you
Yeah.
when you're covering comic book media, you're looking for the actors, right? You're looking for the directors and stuff. You don't really go any deeper than that. And since we've been going deeper in the comic book space, it's
Sure.
an incredibly collaborative process. There's
Yeah.
so many people that make these things possible in all kinds of different ways, and they add so much, so many chefs adding so much to this process that I feel like goes unseen. Do you think your unique journey as somebody who played a little bit in editorial, who wrote, and is now doing your own creative own stuff, the question I guess I'm having is that you seem to know that. You seem to know that this is a collaboration and that it is the
Totally.
people to your right and left that are helping you accomplish the things that you have. And
Yeah.
the level of how earnest and candid you are about the people who have gotten you to where you are is incredibly endearing, but it also speaks to a level of self-awareness that no
Yeah.
one really gets anywhere by themselves. Is that something you just learned on your journey, or did you have that like day one? Did you know I need to
Well,
have a good team?
there's a few, I feel like you kind of break it down into three separate components because to make a comic is actually a fairly intimate process because you have the writer, you have your artist, maybe it's split into pencils and inks, but it's very rare these days. So I'll just say artist. You have your colorist, you have your letterer, maybe you have an editor, when you're starting out, once you get into the bigger space. But like when you're making a comic, when you're making the comic, you maybe only have like, I don't know, not counting the cover artists but like you maybe have, I don't know, half dozen people making it,
Yeah,
or maybe eight and plus the cover artist. So you have that, we'll just say dozen people making the comic, which like when you think about it, when you're making a movie, like there's a lot of more people who are
yeah,
all having huge impacts from every main actor to the cinematography to the lighting to the editing to the soundtrack to the direction. There are a lot of people with outsized, influence on the overarching, final product. Whereas comics, I think it is, to make the comic itself, you really only have four people kind of doing, the major work. I guess five if you include your editor. Um, and then there's a whole team of the people who sell the comic, and that is
yeah,
like a whole much bigger thing. You've got your publicity team, you got your marketing people, and you've got the sales department, and you've got like, a million people kind of running around, a million moving parts. You see people, it runs the gamut from like a real tight ship like Dynamite to Mad Cave, who has a lot of people who are kind of like, really, really kind of, putting their feet to the pavement. And then the broader thing is it's the people who are the people who then build your career as a creator.
yeah,
And those are that's the people. It's the press people, it's the retailers who are supporting the work and showing your publishers like, hey, this is somebody that's worth investing in. It's the fans, and then it's your collaborators who, you run into people and then you start giving people jobs like, Davide Tinto and I on Speed Racer, like the reason that that book exists in the way that it does now is because I worked with Dave on a chapter of Avengers Unlimited a few years ago.
yeah.
And we really hit it off. And then we ran into each other at New York Comic Con right as I had gotten my outline approved. And I was like, hey, what are you working on right now? Like, would you have any availability to work on? And luckily he did. So I think there's a lot of different ways to kind of make a comic and then to sell a comic and then to make a comics career. And obviously you need all these component parts. But I will say the actual, I hate to use the word product. I really hate the word. But
It's not
but
like
but the,
what
the
is it, the
sheer the
McDonald's
sheer the
commercial?
sheer noun of it all,
Yeah.
of to make the comic book as an object,
Yes.
um, I think is it has more in common with a garage band.
I was
that
having that thought in my head, honest to God. I'm like, it sounds like
uh,
a bunch of people jamming, in
yes,
a room.
and
And once you get to a point of success, then it's like way more
and
studios
as a
and
result, like I think it does feel a little bit more personal and a little more intimate. And not to say, I mean, the one element that I didn't mention is that, especially when you're working in a big shared universe, it's almost like the negative space where like you are being kind of jostled around by everybody else's stuff,
yeah,
of what you are allowed to do or what you are expected to do, or and it's much harder to kind of like, it's not impossible. And I think the people who have survived the best in the industry have really found a way to make it work. But it's a challenge for sure, an extra challenge. And that's why every time people are like, oh, like I could write a better thing in Marvel, for example. I'm like, well, no, because like you can't just get off the couch and run a marathon. And
yeah,
that's what working at the big two is that they are people who they have to be very high achieving, high functioning
yeah,
in making a comic, because it's not just making a comic, it's making a comic in the context of the various constraints that inevitably arise because of a shared universe.
yeah.
And that's, I think, the other reason why maybe the Absolute line has had the success that it has. It's certainly the reason why Space Ghost has had the success it has. I don't have to do the horse trading for
That's
anybody.
true.
I can just be like, oh, I want to use Zorak, I'm going to use Zorak.
Yeah,
And for the Absolute Universe, like, yeah, Scott and Jason and Kelly and company, of course, they have to do a little bit of horse trading of like who's going to be the one to introduce these characters, but
hmm,
they're early enough into it that like Kelly can say, I want the Suicide Squad, and she can get the Suicide Squad.
yeah,
And so yeah, I think the more characters you have to kind of like negotiate. Yeah, it's tricky. And so not for the faint of heart, but it is when you do it, it feels extra satisfying.
100%. Um, we had Daniel Warren Johnson on here, and
Yeah,
we had spoken to him a bit because he had rustled a couple of feathers with a sketch that he had drawn with Absolute Batman and another
sure.
sketch he had drawn with Optimus Prime. And
Sure.
speaking in generalities,
Yeah,
um, you have been vocal with how you feel like this country is going. Um,
sure.
I think that's incredibly important. I
Yeah.
think that the idea that like the Jack Kirby cat punching a Nazi is like controversial now is so we've gone so far
Well,
from
it's controversial even then because
yeah,
that cover came out before we were in before Pearl Harbor.
yeah,
So even
yeah,
then, it was like very, you can't imagine like the being gnashed on Twitter today. But that is part of the DNA of the whole industry.
yeah,
So yeah, it's one of those things like, on the one hand, I'm not curing cancer here.
yeah,
I know my sternly worded tweets are not gonna change the fascist hellscape that we're in right now, in
mhm,
the year 2026. But um, I feel like it's the least I can do. Like, I just don't want my kids to grow up and be like, Dad, you were quiet during all this. That's the reason I wrote Captain Planet.
yeah.
Like, I mean, I'd pitched that book for like 10 years, but like I sent that outline in the week before the election and it got greenlit the day after. And
And then we
that
cut a
was
bunch of environmental stuff and we cut a
yeah, like
bunch of
that book was 100% because I was pissed off. Turn Lock 2, there's a whole political subplot in there, and it's because I was pissed off. I'm writing a book right now that is because I am pissed off. So I don't know. I mean, like, I don't have the platform or the talent, frankly, of a Daniel Warren Johnson. But so like they say a picture can say 1,000 words, and his pictures, I think, have launched 1,000 tweets.
yes.
But I don't know. I feel like I understand my privilege as a straight white guy in the United States of America. And yes, I'm Jewish, and it's a weird time to be Jewish in this country. But I think, I can still pass,
Yeah.
I think it's the least I can do to say, frankly, what little I've been saying. Because I know that I have friends who, are women, people of color in this business who they get death threats, like they
Yeah.
get nonstop harassment, like just awful, cruel things. I've had it so easy, and maybe it's because I like preemptively block people. They're
Which is
they're
fair.
rude to they're
Yeah.
rude to my colleagues, but I don't know. I think I hate to say it, but I feel like it costs me nothing to say
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
And that's probably my privilege talking. But I'm like, why not? I grew up in Missouri. I still have there are still friends of the family who are very conservative, which breaks my heart,
Yeah.
So
100%.
every time I say something, I'm like, maybe they'll read it, maybe they'll see it,
Yeah.
maybe this will be the thing that makes the light bulb go off. Um, but you know, I know that I've talked with my wife about this quite a bit because it is weird making comic books in
Very
today's
unique. Yeah. Yeah.
today,
Experience.
because you think there's so many things, actionable things that could be done that
Mhm.
would kind of make the world a better place. And the thing my wife said is you're giving people that 5 minutes to catch their breath.
Yeah.
Uh, and I know it doesn't feel like much. And I know that, the argument of sort of, escapism may have kind of led us here. But I think that there are so many people who are really doing the real work, the hard work, of trying to kind of make our country a better place, a safer place, a
Yeah.
more equitable place for everybody. And they deserve a, a break. They deserve to have whatever creature comforts get them through the day.
Yeah.
And if my books are that creature comfort, I consider it a huge honor. And that's sort of, and if I can kind of, I wish it doesn't always work in every book, but I try my best to kind of inject it into my work of
Yeah.
how do we kind of reflect what's going on today, and you know how do we kind of nudge the culture in tiny 1 centimeter increments, towards yeah, being a future that I can raise my kids in.
100%. When we were speaking to Daniel, I had said something along the lines of like, I, because I'm vocal
Yeah,
on some of this stuff, and I have been on Facebook. But as far as like having something to lose, you lose followers that way. If I lose followers, I lose monetization. There's a bunch
sure,
of stuff wrapped in that. You are selling a product. At the end of the day, I
sure.
don't like to call it that. It's art, but
Yeah, yeah,
like you have
yeah.
deadlines, you have
Yep.
things you have to meet, and sometimes that might alienate a subsection of your fan base. But then you ask yourself, is that a subsection you wanted, kind of, in the first place?
Yeah. Well, I think it's also, listen, I've gotten a face full of it from certain movements that I will not be naming.
Okay.
Even before I had Marvel work, I remember getting lit up for 3 days on Twitter, asking, "Hey, could you ask your library to get my books rather than pirate them?" And I had a certain YouTuber of a certain movement decide to use that tweet, and I had people just flooding my mentions, being like, "Well, you did this to Captain America," and I was like, "I don't write for Marvel."
Yeah, what are you
What are
talking
you talking
about?
about? I haven't done anything to anybody. But also, what's the harm? Is it really gonna diminish Steve Rogers to have Sam Wilson also be a Captain America? Is it really gonna diminish Peter Parker to have Miles Morales out there? There's always room to build a bigger table, guys.
Yeah.
And but what I found is there are some people who there's the mirage. There's the people who say, "Oh, well, if you just shut up and dribbled, I would read your book." And here's the thing. No, they wouldn't.
No.
No, they wouldn't. maybe they would have read the book if it had Spider-Man in it, like,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
then if it had Spider-Man in it, they wouldn't care what I would say,
100%.
so like it's one of those things. There are some people who just live to be aggrieved in the internet, and there is no pleasing them. They were never going to be pleased.
Hmm.
So you just mute or block and ignore the noise, because and yeah, there's some people who still are big mad about it, because like I saw them harassing one of my colleagues, and they're
Golly.
like, oh, why did this guy block me? I've never interacted with him. And it's always kind of the tell, is like
Yeah.
is that, yes, I know, but like, had we ever interacted, I know I would have blocked you. So like I just saved us all a lot of heartache. um yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that, like, you want to go to your whacked out ecosystem on Indiegogo and order overpriced books that never arrive. Sure. Like, if that's what curls your toes at night, then great. But like, I'm playing in the big leagues, man. Like, I don't have time to cater to people who can't live up to their societal end of the bargain as a superhero fan.
Yeah.
If you're so media illiterate that you don't understand like the core metaphor of like Superman or the X-Men or Captain America, or what
Yeah.
have you, or Captain Planet, like I only got one wild, precious, beautiful life. I cannot spend it trying to like
Re-educate.
yeah, correct your first grade education. Like,
Yeah, man.
it sucks. It sucks. But at the same time, I'm like, well, I guess you didn't like Cat and Planet that much. Like, like, I guess like, it is one of those things that, like, I work hard to deliver the best books I can. And so if somebody chooses not to buy them because they don't agree with what I consider to be very sensible, common sense politics, that are just apathetic, that is their
Which is
loss.
the bare minimum. Like that's just
Yeah,
like
that
everyone
is
should
their
have to be
loss.
respected. What do you mean everyone should be respected?
Yeah, and I mean, that I think that comes from being a Jewish kid who grew up in the Midwest. Is
Yeah.
that, like, I grew up at a time where, like, I knew very, deep in my bones that I was able to live and have the kind of life and freedom and safety by the largesse of a country like the United States, where it was okay to be Jewish in the
Mm.
Midwest, and that it was not illegal, and it was not something that deserved to be ostracized. And so when I see people of color, when I see people of the LGBT community, when I see women, who are just, they're being picked on. There's no other way to describe it.
Yeah, that's
Um,
100%. Hmm.
I it doesn't just offend me to my core, although it does offend me to my core. But I think even just selfishly, I'm like, when you have a party whose entire political belief is, let's throw whatever disenfranchised group to the wolves, and really at random,
Hmm.
um, you know,
Hmm.
um, it's just Mad Libs. When's it gonna be me?
Yeah.
And so I consider it, I got a vested self-interest in having a country that is not going to throw disenfranchised people to the wolves, because someday it could be me. Someday it could be anybody who has anybody who's not a straight white Christian rich male who's not disabled.
Yeah.
And I think there are some people who, sadly, that's exactly their full circle. And they don't get it, and there's an information news media bubble, the
Yeah.
Fox News brainwashing. There's a lot of religious components to some of it. Anyway, that was a long way of just saying, like, I am not going to miss an ounce of sleep worrying about what somebody who wouldn't consider my best friend a human being, or wouldn't consider, if my wife had an ectopic pregnancy, would, try to tell her she couldn't get treated. I'm not going to waste a minute worrying about what they would have to say about me and my books, because I know they would never buy them.
Oh, that's well said. No, that's well said. That you're 100% right on that. And it feels like, I forget as we get older, we start to really key in on the fact that we are living history. Every day is living
Sure.
history, right? And you when you read the history books and at any period of time, you look to the art. and how did the art reflect what was going on at the time? And
Sure.
I don't know how you can just kind of stick your fingers in your ears and blah blah blah, because it's affecting almost every facet of our current society. And I think that's why I become a louder evangelist for this stuff, because it's you guys putting your hearts into it. I give this spiel all the time, but I find this medium incredibly inspirational, and I love what the effect that it has. But when people who don't read comics ask me about what I find inspirational, they usually are like, "Oh, so you're a big Superman fan," and like all the stuff and Captain America and whatever. And I'm like, I like those guys enough, but it's the actual person writing it, because they live in my world. They know the world sucks. And the
Yeah.
idea that they can give any sort of hope or optimism when they're looking out the same window that I am, that's the true gift. That's something that's so palpable and then lives in those books. And like a contagion, it can spread if you are giving it out or a whole bunch of people are reading it. I'm looking out on Twitter, and you see a lot of people posting the symbol for the Ultimates, Dennis Camp's The Ultimates, right? During
Yeah.
these protests and during these these big stand sit-ins and stuff, because he gave a little bit of his rebellious nature about like how we should handle what's been going on here now. And I I know it feels like you have nothing to lose, but I do still feel like it's a gamble, and I appreciate you being so candid and honest online and with me here in regards to it, because it is maddening when people are pretending like nothing's going on. And usually
Yeah.
those people have their pockets lined pretty well, so they don't really have to experience some of the pitfalls that this current world has to deal with.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I think, look, you said it yourself that this industry is built on morality tales. And so I find it, you know, I I I, I feel like you got to at least put your money where your mouth is,
A little bit.
like a little bit. And I understand. Listen, I will say that I am sure there are some people who I'm sure are quieter about it, and I will say that I don't agree with it. I don't think it's them tacitly approving what's going on as much as I think they just are worried about the slew of abuse.
Hmm.
Not even about the sales, but just like the personal psychological abuse that they will
Yeah.
get from corners of the internet. But I feel like, you know, if you think I would say if you think you got it bad, just imagine like literally being a woman creator, like
Yeah. Yeah.
a creator of color, that they're getting it just for existing,
Yeah.
for literally just taking up the tiniest modicum of space in the business. So like, yeah, I feel like, again, like we should speak out. And so yeah, I think as people who are writing morality plays month in and month,
That's kind of the part of the job.
it's kind of the point,
No,
you know?
no, I
Yeah,
get it. I remember I was talking, and I'm like, I don't think Superman would be down with these like unlawful detaining of immigrants. And
yeah,
someone was like, he'd
yeah.
totally be down. And I'm like, then why is Martian Manhunter still here? He didn't fill out
Well,
no
that's a good
papers.
point, but also like literally, like, it's not like he
He didn't fill out
registered with the
papers.
government when he was sent in a rocket ship as a baby.
Right. Yeah.
Like yeah, it's just, we reopen the schools. We have a reading
Yes.
crisis
Yes.
in
Please.
the country.
On a light note, what are
Yeah.
your favorite pieces of comic book media? What do you think are
Ooh.
the holy grail when it comes to some of the comic book movies or television shows that you've taken in your lifetime?
Well, the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie was kind of like the way that Christopher Reeve's Superman kind of influenced like Mark Waid. That's what
Yeah,
that movie did to me.
awesome.
That certainly when that came out, I was like, oh, that'd be so cool to like have a creative career. And Avengers Infinity War is probably like my favorite of the MCU movies. I feel like that really like was such a masterclass in like juggling all the characters and the plot points and still feeling so engaging. That felt like the best comic book movie, the most comic of comic book movies. Um, The Flash, that first season of that
Yeah,
show
man.
was about as good of a superhero show as anyone could have possibly asked for. Um, Other comic book media.
Have you ever checked out Superman and Lois?
I haven't.
I'd
I
recommend
need
it.
to.
Pretty good.
I just moved out here, so I was with
Ah, yeah,
I was without cable for a little while.
fair.
Um, but I'm trying to think if there's others. I mean, of course, like the early heydays, like the original X-Men, first X-Men movie, the first Blade movie.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Batman Begins is like I think a big influence in a lot of what I do, and as is interning at DC this summer, The Dark Knight came
Oh my
out.
God. Yeah,
Wild.
yeah. That
Seeing
Halloween was crazy. It was all
an
Jokers.
opening night in Times Square was crazy.
Hell yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, I'm sure I'll think of a million other things after we
Yeah,
finish, but um, yeah, I mean, I think the genre is still the studios to lose. I think there's still I know that people can say, and I can't disagree, seeing that the genre may be a little long on the tooth, but I think it's only one good course correction away
I agree.
from everybody just being like, well, that was a weird blip.
Yeah, yeah,
And so I'm very hopeful about the new Spider-Man movie and the new Avengers movie coming out, and I'm really excited to see everything going on at DC.
yeah,
So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of cool stuff out there. And I feel really fortunate that in the last, like quarter century,
yeah, right.
that this childhood passion of mine somehow became mainstream,
Blockbuster. Yeah.
and became like a dominant cultural force. And so I'm honored to be like even like a small part of all that.
I gotta geek out a little bit because um when like I said, this started about 10 years ago, and I
Yeah,
didn't have a bead on Superman. Like I appreciated him and I acknowledged him, but I wasn't the biggest Superman fan. And ironically, one of the things that made me a bigger Superman fan, besides some of the major books that he's in, was The Flash. Because
yeah,
they found a way to not make being a goody two shoes person corny or like
yeah,
too saccharine. He's
yeah,
just a good guy. And it's just a good guy trying every day to be the best person that he can be. And it's such
yeah,
a basic characterization, but it never clicked for me when it came to Superman. And now, like, you can't not see it. You can't not see that that's the journey of that character. That doesn't want to fly above us. He wants to walk among us and just wants to be the
yeah,
best version. You talk about like we're talking about again with like the immigrant story. Some of the immigrants in America work harder than Americans, and I feel like Superman
sure.
is that for humans. Like he wants to be the three times a human because he loves humans so much and he's so grateful that he's around. So I got a lot of Superman vibes from The Flash. One of the other it's going to be a trilogy now, pieces of media that I think really hammers home what comic book movies can be are the Spider-Verse movies. I don't know if you've checked out
Sure.
those.
Oh, I love those. Yeah, I can't believe I didn't say those. Because yeah, those I mean those are amazing, and I'm like chomping at the bit for the third one to come out. I'm it's next summer.
Yeah, they
So
keep pushing it. It's been pushed a couple
it's been
times.
pushed a couple of times. Listen, my baby will be a year old. I'm sure I can leave them
Yeah,
with their grandparents or something. So I can go see that. Yeah, I'm very excited. Those are really pushing the boundaries of kind of what the superhero genre can do, but also animation.
yeah, art.
I love how ambitious those are, and I think those movies in particular are a really needed reminder of what our genre can do and what this industry can do. Because I think it's so I get it. Like if it feels played out,
Yeah.
like to kind of just circle back, do the, play the hits to diminishing returns. And you see something like a Spider-Verse and you're like, oh no, there's still a lot more that can be mined. We just kind of have to look a little bit more off the beaten path for it.
Yeah, I completely agree. Before we end this, do you have a only in comics story? Do you have a business anecdote, something that you've gone through that you're like, this would only happen in the industry that I'm
Oh, man, there
in?
yeah, the one and only time my wife joined me at a convention, somebody in a scooter dressed up as Deadpool parked in front of my table and proceeded to talk about what sex positions he liked in
Oh
character.
my God.
And
So this is the
I
first and
could
last
just like
time.
feel I could just feel my wife deciding behind me that I'm never doing this again. And so Yeah, that's probably the only in comics story that I've got. Thanks for nothing, Motor Scooter Deadpool.
Deadpool, you did it. You ruined everything.
You ruined it. But no, I mean, seriously, the only in comics is that I'm a third generation fan, and I feel like I've made good, as well as anyone could hope. And it took me a long time to get there, but I think it just speaks to how open and forward thinking this industry and the fans can be. That they've given me this opportunity to prove myself, and I want to continue to do that every single day. And and so I think I don't know if I'd be able to do this anywhere else. And so I think that's maybe the only in comics story is for somebody like me to kind of have found the level of success that I have had. Um, it's only because of the generosity of the comics industry, and I look forward to paying that back every single day.
Yeah, I mean, like you were talking about before, you go to conventions. I met you at MegaCon this year,
Yeah.
and a little bit of a side story. We on the 20th of this year, maybe purposely, maybe not, 420. We hit our 10-year anniversary with Comic Book Click, and again, it started with media covering that kind of stuff, the podcast, and then these international reviews. We have guys on the review team from all over the world who are passionate and putting out these reviews. Sawyer being one of them.
Yeah.
We've talked to more creators than we've had recently, but I think in this medium, because so much of you is in it,
Sure.
the highs are the highest and the lows can sometimes be the lowest. And
Yeah.
I was in a very weird space for MegaCon because I have to rep myself. I'm repping Comic Book Click. I have to,
Yeah.
be the ambassador and beat the drum. And sometimes I have it, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I'm walking the con floor for 4 hours, right? And I'm just like, and going over to your table and you recognizing the logo and you kind of shouting us out has put a battery in my back. It was really, it was such a small thing, but you talk about giving back to the community, and you're one of the most giving creators I've ever spoken to. You really genuinely love what you do, and you realize how transformative this energy is, and how cyclical this energy is, and the energy that you put out,
Yeah.
and how it just wraps around you. So embarrassingly, I was telling this story on a live, and I maybe have shed a tear because um, to be seen, to be seen. And I know
Yeah.
you must have had that experience either reading or just being a writer in this. And
Sure.
thank you so much for that. Thank you so much
Oh,
for
my
putting so much
pleasure.
of yourself in
You're,
this book. And
I think what you guys are doing, and it's hard. It's hard to get traction in comics journalism in the year 2026. I know that very, very well. And so the fact that Comic Book Click has gotten the traction, the fact that I see you guys' Facebook posts, the fact that like I see you on social, the fact that I see, that I check out your YouTube,
yeah,
like that's the fact that you've been able to sort of establish that niche for yourself, I think is a big deal. And I think it's a testament to your hard work. But I think, as somebody who's come from the comics journalism scene, game recognizes game. But also, I recognize that just in the same way that what I do is out of passion, I know that's what you do. And I know that's what every comics journalist does because I know that the money's not that great. Like,
no,
for the sheer fire hose of content that you are hit with every single week. So that's why I take the time. I always, take the time to do interviews. It's why I'm always so grateful for when people take the time to cover my work is because, um, I work my ass off on this stuff.
yeah,
And so, like you said, the fact that like being seen, that my collaborators are being recognized, that people are understanding they see this isolating work and yet they find that spark of connection. That's magic, and so yeah, I think so I'm always very grateful to the comics journalism scene for really championing me from the beginning. They didn't have to. I think well, for a long time I think it would have been very easy for them to be like, ugh, like can't this guy stay in his lane. But the fact that they gave me a shot and they held me to the same standards as they would everybody else, and they seem to like it. That's huge for me.
Yeah. I appreciate you being so giving, giving your time, your energy, all that stuff. The passion is palpable in all of these books. It's why you are successful, and I know you will continue to be successful. Another 10 years, another decade of
Yeah.
David right there on the horizon. And I know it hasn't happened yet, but DC's gonna come a calling, and
Hey,
they're gonna need their ambush bug take, and you might have to get in on that and you know.
yeah, listen. If they ever want me to write Shazam or the Suicide Squad, I would be there with bells on. But I'm having a lot of fun with the books that I'm on right now. Space Ghost
Yes.
has some really fun stuff coming after our annual in July. Speed Racer. We've just hit the halfway point on sort of our first volume on that. And A new creator-owned thing that I've got coming out next summer that we're just getting the ball rolling
Ooh.
on. That's really fun. If you guys missed me doing some horror, we got some of that coming. And then yeah, another super secret project that we are starting to get the ball rolling on that knock on wood, if the licensor goes for it, it is going to be a big grand slam sometime next year.
I believe it. Everything you've touched, man, has turned to gold, and I think it's because you've got the magic in you. Again, an
Thank you.
incredibly unique medium that is pushed forward by creators like you who put it on their back and don't just see this as a paycheck, but see it as a way to connect with the humans around them. Which, again, if you're not doing that, are you living? If you're just isolating yourself and just doing what you need to do for yourself and by yourself, I think you're kind of you're missing out on what all this can be. I feel like we're a bit more connected because of the books that you've created. And thank you so much for all that you do
Oh,
in this industry.
well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. And To all you guys out there, go ahead, pick up these books: Space Ghost, Speed Racer, Captain Planet. I don't know how you ended up with three IPs with talking monkeys or with monkey sidekicks, but
And the OZ with the winged monkeys there. I
yeah,
am
yeah,
the comics industry's monkey laureate.
yes.
Yes, you can put that on my gravestone.
A lot of Jane Goodall documentaries you're checking
That's
out.
right. That's
Hey
right.
man, gotta get in the head of those apes there. But
Yeah.
yeah, thank you so much, guys. Pick up those books, and you know how we always like to leave this off. Always remember that you, yes, you are worthy. Thanks, guys.